Hello, 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 and good afternoon. Welcome everyone to the Community Health Training Alliance Black History Month webinar series. My name is Dr. Tashina Rita, and I am the director of CHEETA, and I'm excited to have you all as today marks our last webinar of this series. And so we're excited that you chose to attend, and I hope that many of you have also attended the previous webinars as well. And so before we get started, I would like to just give you a little reminders of what to expect during the course of this webinar. The chat box is currently open as you will be asked to do an activity in the chat box. Thereafter, the chat box will be closed. You can ask all of your Q&A questions, all your questions rather, in the Q&A box to be answered at the end of the webinar. If you have any concerns, any thoughts, we want to hear from you, use that Q&A box below at the bottom of your screen. And so today I'm excited to have with us Dr. Dominique Verdreen, who is one of our presenters, and Davlin Hill, who will be here having the conversation on patriarchy and masculinity, its impact on the Black family. And so I hope you have your notebooks and things to write with, to take notes, and to be in tune to today's presentation. And so without further ado, I'm going to hand over the presentation to our presenters.
Thank you, Dr. Reeder. We are very honored to be here. We thank Philadelphia Fight for giving us this opportunity in celebration and honoring of Black History Month. So I'm Dr. Dominique Verdreen, and I am here with my colleague, Ms. Davlin Hill. And we are with Verdreen's Healing Services, which is a private practice that I have out in South Carolina, but we also provide services to individuals in Connecticut as well as in North Carolina. So we just want to go ahead and just jump right in. Before we start, I do want to let everyone know that patriarchy and toxic masculinity and its impact on the Black family, while very important, there's just so much to talk about that we had to condense a lot to be able to honor the time that was given to us. So while there's a lot more to discuss, we want to go ahead and preface that in the very beginning. So we thank you in advance for your understanding and for your patience. Like I said, we are very happy to have you here with us to talk about patriarchy and toxic masculinity and its impact on the Black family.
And let me extend my thanks as well and to everyone who's joined us today to have this conversation. And you might be thinking, but you're Black women talking about Black men. And so that was a question for us as well. And then we figured the opportunity to share our perspective along with some research and voices from individual men, as you'll hear in our presentation. We like to start though with acknowledgement of the land, excuse me, and the people of the land, and just gratitude for how we're able to meet. So I think about Zoom and where it's located, and the land that that it is on, which allows us to be able to meet and commune, is really wonderful. And yet, people of where we're all from were made to leave forced extinction, the plan of genocide, death and murder, the exploitation of labor, all to own land in order for greed to prosper, power for the sake of greed. And that is still happening. Even now today, as we look at water rights and fire rights around the country. So I don't know where you're located, but where I'm located in South Carolina was the traditional unceded land of the Cherokee, the Catawba, excuse me, and the Saluda, and many more use the land for hunting and gathering. And I don't want it to seem like Indigenous folks aren't here, because they are, in even, some of our heritages. So it's not about oh, they're gone. It's more what do we do to return to the idea that we belong to the land, that we're a part of it? And because the ownership that extends even into patriarchy, right? The idea that people own people's bodies and can tell them what to do also extends to the land and treated it like we do. So we just wanted to share the beautiful Blue Ridge Mountains with you, where we're located, and to give a moment for you to think about your personal relationship with the land and what that means to you. It's just a moment. If you'll look outside or think about your favorite place on earth and how that place makes you feel, and think about what it means to belong to the land instead of seeing it as ownership. So I'm going to take maybe 60 seconds to do that. And if you'd like to put in the chat, where you're located and the original inhabitants of the land, if you know, you'll have to see where you're from. We are about to have a conversation that is difficult, and conversations that are difficult often land in our bodies. And I think sometimes I used to think that words like sadness or anger were just in your head. I was like, oh, cut off from the shoulder, from the neck down, but we're not. So as these words land in your body, we just kind of wanted to ground first and then set an intention for how we want to show up in the space. So we're just going to take a few breaths together. If you will, trust us in that. If you feel comfortable closing your eyes, please do so. If not, just find a spot to gaze softly where you are, and your feet are on the floor, or if you're sitting on the floor, that works as well. And we just want you to breathe deeply, to relax as you do best, and to breathe deep. Each breath you take is deeper than the last. So maybe the first breath is a little shallow, and then it goes deeper and deeper in the 3 breaths that we're going to take. And I'm going to count us through. So ready? 1, 2, 3. Inhale. Hold your breath. And exhale. Inhale. Hold your breath. And exhale. And last time, inhale. Hold your breath. And exhale. You're just going to continue to breathe slowly and deeply, and think about the things that you need to lay aside to be able to fully enter this webinar, to let the words land, to deal with discomfort that might arise. What do you need to lay aside to be able to do that? And then what is it that you would like to bring to this conversation? Are you bringing an open heart? Are you bringing an open mind? Or what are you bringing? What do you need to lay down, and what are you bringing? I, for one, need to lay down a little bit of anxiety. And I am bringing curiosity to this conversation. And Dr. Vadrine, if you want to read some of those out, that would be really fantastic. I think it'd be cool for us to hear. It's said out loud.
Yes. So we have, I believe, laying aside attending by the phone. I said needing to lay aside my own anxiety and bringing in openness and humility. And someone is bringing in patience.
That's great.
As well as an open mind. Someone else wrote that in as well.
Awesome. I think that's a good space. Some open-mindedness, some humility, some patience. It's good. We'll be ready. Thank you all. You please continue to put that in the chat as before Dr. Reader closes it. Thank you for your participation.
So we also want to, in today's discussion, to look at the interconnectedness of oppression and culture and its impact on personhood. So specifically with regards to toxic masculinity, patriarchy, heteronormativity, Black families in relation to the oppression of racism as well. So today our objective is to present and define key terms specific to our topic, to provide context for the discussion of Black men, patriarchy, and toxic masculinity, as well as to discuss the intrapersonal and interpersonal impact of these concepts, specifically in the family setting. So key terms we would like to discuss first and foremost are patriarchy, racism, and toxic masculinity. And please note that when we share these definitions, these are operational definitions we're going to be utilizing. There's a myriad of definitions. So just so that we're all on the same page of the same book, we're going to provide the operational definitions that we're utilizing for the purposes of this webinar.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Adrienne. I was going to say the exact same thing. So be like, well, these are our operational definitions that we came to from like our search and thinking about these power dynamics at work in the world. Of course, you might have your own definition, but we just want you to, what would it be like to kind of have an open-minded discussion using these as our starting point for discussion? So patriarchy, we looked up the literal word, rule of the father, from ancient Greek. And at its simplest, it's the social structure of male supremacy. And that operates at the expense of women. So the oppression is built on misogyny and the exploitation and the brutalization of women. That is what patriarchy has come to mean. Obviously, over time, this definition has shifted and morphed to now when I hear patriarchy, this is what I think of. That it's the exploitation and brutalization of women, which leads to controlling of bodies, of how people show up in the world, of power and control, and then how people feel in that setting when those things are challenged. What happens when we have a patriarchal thing happening in the same family. Racism, a belief that race is a fundamental determinant of human traits and capacities, and that racial differences produce inherent superiority. So there's a race that is superior, and in the world wide over, we call it white supremacy or white body supremacy. And because of that hierarchy, there are three types of racism at work all the time. And those are the personal, the interpersonal, and the systemic. For our discussion, the personal being attitudes and beliefs. So those might just stay in your head. You might think Black people are dangerous. All folks from, with different immigration statuses have come for nefarious reasons. Those are just kind of attitudes and beliefs that are based off of false narratives. The second thing is the interpersonal. So this is when your thoughts start to act out in how you treat people. It is the thinking that when you enter a room, I already know everything, I already know more than everybody else because white people are smarter. Or I don't know anything because I'm entering their space and I'm Black and all these people know more than I. So, internalized racism also works interpersonally. And then the last or the third type is systemic. So it is, in the roots and systems and structures of our nation. And so those are at work as well. So that would be those attitudes working in interpersonal between folks and then leading to a structure being built and having that structure play out all of those, interpersonal ways. Or when I think about the criminal justice system, for example, something that starts as a slave patrol, at least in the South, to, collect and return folks who have been enslaved, that is a system of racism. And so then it starts and moves forward, but it still has those underpinnings. So it can also go backward the other way. So if there's a system and I don't even have any thoughts about people of different faiths, right? I just don't have any thoughts about it. But I hear, oh, these people are dangerous. These people are like this. Okay, so now that system has taught me something. So now interpersonally, when I interact with people of different faiths, I don't honor their journey or respect them It's like, I know the truth. And then now it's a personal belief. And now I'm living out of that, and it's more grounded in me. So we see these three at work all the time, in most of our systems and in our communities. The last definition I want to share with you is toxic masculinity, which refers to the idea that manliness perpetrates male domination, homophobia, and aggression. Toughness is the idea that men should be physically strong, emotionally callous, and aggressive. I'm going to let that land for a minute. That's toxic masculinity. This is the idea of manliness. Or anti-femininity. So this is that men should reject anything that is considered to be feminine, such as showing emotion or accepting help. Crying, oh, I can't do that. And then, the word that comes after that, I can't be a little, it's like, what? How did that, what? Toxic masculinity. And then power. This is the assumption that men must work toward obtaining power and status, social and financial, so that they can gain the respect of others. So basically, you are a machine who doesn't have feelings and has to excel in whatever you do so that you gobble up power and status. That's what toxic masculinity is kind of teaching in our culture. So if I combine toxic masculinity and patriarchy, what room is there to be an authentic person who has both energies, all the energies working through and with? So these are just some of our definitions that we're going to talk about today.
Thank you, Davlin, for sharing those definitions with us. Right now, I'd like for us to take a look at the screen in front of us and the image that you see. And if you wouldn't take a moment just to note down, what do you see in this image? And what feelings come up for you as you look at the images on your screen right now? So what I love about this, the image that you're seeing, it just shows the complexity of Black men and the multifacetedness about Black men that we don't always get to see in mass media. And so this is why I really appreciate it. And so we wanted to make sure that we utilize that today as well in our webinar.
It's actually a good time to take a little cleansing breath because I can feel the constriction in my chest, but to see these, pictures of happiness and the full extent of emotions and love, it's good to remember that though we're talking about this isn't the rule for every person. Every person out here is not doing, all of these toxic masculinity and, these ways of seeing patriarchy in the world. So it's like there are people who are walking in trying to live differently. And so this helped me remember that it's not all doom and gloom.
Yes, and Teresa stated that she expressed upon seeing this, potentially feeling anger, or seeing anger, seeing unity, family, and also pain is what she shared in the chat, what they shared in the chat, excuse me. Thank you. So we'd like to take a moment to pay attention to cultural critic Bell Hooks, a quote that she shared. Patriarchy is a political, social system that insists that males are inherently dominating, superior to everything and everyone deemed weak, especially females, and endowed with the right to dominate and rule over the weak, and to maintain that dominance through various forms of psychological terrorism and violence. So some feelings may have come up as people hear or heard the reference of men being seen in this light, and as females being called weak. So we just want to take a moment for us to read through this and process our experience of what was just read. Thank you, Dablin.
So when I'm in, obviously, we really love the arts and believe that you can learn a lot from what people are saying and the art that they're producing, like the painting that we just saw and the different types of photography. And there is work being done around this area. And so this is Max Litt, and I'm going to share his bio. Max Litt is a writer and personal chef from Greenville, South Carolina. Having no formal education in creative writing, Max honed his craft through life experiences, self-publishing his debut work, Soul Therapy, a collection of works inspired by the life of Max Litt, in 2014. As an aspiring novelist, Max is currently working on a project titled The Vanity of Love, a story about a young writer navigating his way through success and heartbreak. He also hosts a podcast, It Is What It Is, a podcast gumbo featuring Max Litt, and publishes a periodic blog, Speak On It with Max Litt. As a self-proclaimed foodie, he recently launched his personal catering business, Meals by Max, in 2021. We all have the unlimited potential to change the world through our gifts and talents, Max says. It's the creatives that will lead the charge. You can follow Max Litt on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all the ways. And Max shared a poem with us to share with you all based on these concepts. So we're gonna have a listen to that.
Spin cycle. Problem is, all this toxicness inside our DNA that hides within white supremacy's patriarchal rules of engagement. The war inside no Black man, Black woman, Black child, born and unborn is safe from. Black man, provider. Black woman, everything else. Black child, sponge absorbing it all, just to sour on it when they cross paths with familiar spirits that make them feel comfortable and triggered at the same time. But that feeling, masquerading as normal as it has for generations, tricks us into believing our upbringing wasn't all that bad. But all that bad means not all good when society describes emotional unavailability as a strong character trait, mocks vulnerability, laughing as emotional breakdowns take center social media stages and mental health comes into question, all because pops never cried and moms only did in anger. Wash on gentle cycle. This garment is delicate. Lay flat to dry, reshape by hand, or clean professionally. Spin cycle.
So we wanted to share a quote by a Black man, Arya Baker. And yeah, it speaks for itself, so I'm just going to read it. Historically, Black men have opted into toxic masculinity to preserve their sanity. Let's take that for a minute. And to protect and provide for their families, beginning with slavery, America's socio-political structures and institutions have upheld a racially stratified patriarchal class system that to varying degrees has oppressed everyone except wealthy white men. This reality, coupled with a desperation to escape racialized poverty, left Black men with no other choice but to attempt assimilating into the dominant culture. When I read this quote and some other work by Arya Baker, I like something kind of switched in my brain to, but it just made me understand some nuances, I think, in culture, in our culture, especially with the sanity and protecting to provide for families. So, either I act like this dominant male patriarchal system and try to succeed, or I don't. And then what am I going to do? What's the other option? What other ways, what other paths are there? Especially when these things aren't clear. People will say, no, that's not how it is. But then, TV and our courts and the medical system provides opportunities to show us that actually this is at work all the time. And that slavery after slavery, especially instituted that the hierarchy system that, you can't move up. What are you going to do if you're not a white man, wealthy white man? And we all have varying degrees of participating in the system. So, yeah.
Thank you, Dav. Yeah, when I first read that quote, I was like, who wrote this? I mean, Black men don't opt into toxic masculinity. But like you stated, upon reading more about Mr. Baker's work, I got a better understanding. But the first thing for me was defensiveness that came up. Like, how dare this person say this, right? And of course, the assumption that I made was that this person was not Black. So yes, thank you for sharing that with us. So we also want to take a look at toxic masculinity. And so for specifically as it pertains to its impact on Black men and subsequently Black families, Black women, the Black community. So we see it as being racism plus patriarchy. And so the way in which we see toxic masculinity, it's really looking at the confluence of racism and male body supremacy that leads to toxic masculinity. This is where men of color are conditioned to believe that they're inferior to white men, which can lead to the pull for power and control in any means. And then, whereas for white men, there's this inherent belief that they're superior to Black people, Black men. And so this is where we'll see the problem that presents itself when that's not the case. And so there's just like cognitive dissonance that occurs. And so we have to do things to make sure that that is indeed the case. And this is where projection comes in, right? This is where you hear these stories about, your brain is smaller, or we'll have these tests that are not necessarily, that are culturally biased and not necessarily testing what they say they're testing. So there's all these ways in which we have to maintain said power, which leads to toxic masculinity.
Yeah, that makes me think of like the expectation for for Black men to be the provider based on the patriarchal rules, and to have power over. So not only are you to hold all the resources, but now you're supposed to have power over, and to have any kind of emotions makes you less than, makes you feminine, and oh goodness, don't be feminine. And so there's this pull in the family, back and forth, like, but what if I can't provide, right? Well, what if, based on opportunities, or because so many folks end up spending time in the prison system, come out and the job, your jobs are super hard then. And so what if you're in a relationship where the person is making more money than you are, but you are operating out of toxic masculinity? There can be that devaluing, and all kinds of things are happening because inside I'm not doing what I'm supposed to do. When who told you what you're supposed to do? Patriarchy, white supremacy.
And that's what happens when we have there's this rigidity about our expression, the expression of Black men, right? And so there's a panoply of ways in which we can show up and be, but we're constricted to this, and that's what creates more of the problems.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, now for the fun part. We are excited to present you with a tough love with Bell Hooks' interview, and we are going to read the parts. So I'm going to be Bell Hooks, which, I mean, obviously, who wouldn't want to be Bell Hooks? So sorry for her passing, but so thankful for her scholarship, her beliefs around love, and her, being a Black feminist, and being willing to talk about patriarchy and being willing to say really hard things. I admire her. So we're going to stop the share.
Well, thank you for doing this interview, Bell Hooks. We really appreciate you being here today. In your book, All About Love, you write about how common it is to try to find someone who can love the flaws that you can't. But in The Will to Change, you also discuss how, with regard to masculinity and love, men often feed into the avoidance of intimacy through abusive tactics. So I'm wondering, since the intimate partners of men can often end up being the keepers of their vulnerability, but also the keepers of their rage, as you say, do you feel that it is more acceptable for men to have and show their flaws in intimate relationships than it is for women?
I think especially it's okay for a man to show his flaws to the woman he's involved with. I don't think men are particularly open to showing their flaws in relationships that are not intimate because they want to be safe. Whereas women are made to feel that we aren't safe and that, in fact, we might feel that we'll be safer if we acknowledge flaws, if we have an assumption of vulnerability. I'm not good at blank, I make mistakes, or what have you. That will, in fact, ease our way in the world. I don't think men think that will ease their way in the world. There's this constant flow of negative self-judgment, and that is just so counter to love.
It's easy to think of chemistry as being a foundation of love. But in your book, All About Love, you caution us away from that line of thought. You tell us that love is an action and a choice. But what about choosing to love someone who doesn't choose to love you? Can that also be a form of perfect love, or is perfect love always mutual?
I can love somebody who doesn't love me, but I can't have a relationship of love with somebody who doesn't love me. It's very hard to hold to loving someone who is not going to love you. I remember when I was in this relationship with a younger man, and he had a decision that he didn't want to love me, and I kept wanting him to love me. I would say to my therapist, well, I'm going to go over to his place. And she said, well, I think it's fine if you go over to his place for friendship, but if you're going over there looking for love, you're not going to find it because that's not something he's able to give, and he doesn't want to work at giving it to you. Those were really harsh truths to hear, but they were true. I'm still friends with this person today, even though we broke up years ago, because I stopped expecting him to give me something he didn't want to give me, or that he might have just been completely incapable of giving.
So in your book, All About Love, you discuss perfect love as a state of refining as opposed to something that is inherently there. What do you think that process of refining can look like over time?
I think it's so much about acceptance of self and other. I'm always amazed by how much we don't accept. I was talking in our group about long-term married people, like people who are married for 30 years, and you still find in many of those, especially heteronormative relationships, this thread of dissatisfaction with the other person or annoyance with the other person. I know my parents had it, and they were married for 30 years, but it's like there never the moment of acceptance of that person as being who they are. Because also accepting someone as they are may mean also you have to accept that they can't be what you want them to be. And I think that's really hard for us. We want to make people be what we want them to be. As I look at young women looking for love in heteronormative relationships, the first question that comes up with them, and guys, it's not quality of being, like, are you kind? It's first of all, are you cute? And then it's, what does he do? And I'm guilty of this too, with all my feminism. A lot of people don't agree with me, but I actually believe that men are just as unhappy in relationships as women within patriarchy, because studies show that most men across race, across class, across economics, choose a female partner based on liking her looks. You hear guys talk about, oh yeah, the moment I saw her, I knew that was the woman I was going to marry. But they're really talking about some deep attraction they had to this person's physicality, not to qualities of being. Often in heteronormative spaces, if the man is not exhibiting patriarchal masculinity, people will say, oh, Belle, he's gay, which I think is probably one of the fiercest barriers to heterosexual men challenging patriarchy, the fear they will be perceived as gay, the homophobia that lies underneath that. And we see that the self-actualized man or self-loving man isn't afraid of being perceived as gay because he knows who he knows who he is. If he's gay, that's fine. If he's not, that's fine too. But I think in general, most men do not allow themselves the freedom to be fully self-actualized.
Thank you so much, Bell Hooks.
Thank you.
So we want to take a moment to look at what this organization known as the Black Emotional and Mental Health Collective believes about traditional masculinity and its impact on mental health. And this organization, Black Emotional and Mental Health Collective, really focuses on healing the Black community through education, advocacy, and training. And so this is one of the tools that they came up with that we think is really essential as it looks at traditional masculinity and mental health. So it looks at how traditional masculinity forces gendered upbringing, and children are born and seen as boys. Children who are born and seen as boys are immediately taught by communities to emotionally repress or deny their feelings or any quality considered to be feminine. In addition, traditional masculinity teaches males to disconnect, right? So being taught to disconnect from their emotions leads to struggles with expressing feelings and contributes to depression, anxiety, isolation, and violence for young Black masculine folks, men, and adults. In addition, there's harm to self and others when this happens, when we're operating out of traditional masculinity. There's a lack of connection to the emotional self and coping strategies, which leads many Black masculine folks to enact distress onto people more vulnerable, specifically Black women, queer individuals, trans folks, and or themselves at times. Traditional masculinity also leads to exploitation by systems of oppression. Davlin, you spoke about this earlier, about the criminal justice system, inaccessibility of healthcare and mental health resources exploits Black masculine folks and Black people. Excess emotional labor is often placed on women and caretakers, which creates their own mental health challenges. And as we know, there's a stigma also related to people Black people in particular, seeking mental health services as well, which also further the oppression that Black people experience. And then there's the cycle of harm that continues to repeat itself throughout generations, with children, family, and community experiencing the harm. And it just continues to repeat itself due to the fact of us continuing with the traditional masculinity, which is often linked to toxic masculinity as well.
Yeah, I like that they say traditional masculinity because these are some of those, but the toxic takes those things to level 1000. You're forced gendered upbringing now. If you cry or anything, it's like, get up, you don't need to cry. Men don't cry, or disconnecting, abusing of substances. So it's like, yes, these are traditional, but when traditional gets toxic, it turns these things. I mean, this should be bright red, all of these things, because it's dangerous. Dangerous for society, dangerous for women, dangerous for children, and the exploitation is real. We talked a little bit about this, the impacts on Black men for patriarchy and toxic masculinity, but wanted to, go back through it. One is the rigid roles leads to anxiety. When there's no room to move within a role, and let's say you don't see yourself living up to that role, anxiety, it leads to anxiety. And we know that, you know, through like epigenetics, there's already anxiety running through many of our veins, due to what Black folks' ancestors went through, and the anxiety with living in a world that's not safe. And so if you have an overall not safe feeling, you know, breathing really shallow, years of breathing shallow has an effect on our bodies. And then you have an anxiety that goes with it that's, oh, and I can't perform. I can't do the things I'm supposed to do. I can't make it. What am I going to do instead? So how do people deal with the anxiety? I think there's violence, and there's abusing of substances, and mental health, greater mental health disorders, post-traumatic stress disorder, all kinds of things start to work their way when anxiety is like the main way we operate. We're grounded in anxiety, being grounded in anxiety. The second thing, arrested emotional and cognitive development. When, you know, we're just talking about anxiety. If I'm living out of anxiety, I'm not really breathing, not present in my body. I'm not actually taking time and making those memories make sense or having a meaning from them, then I don't even know, like, what am I feeling? What are emotions? Anger might be okay because, you know, men can be angry. That's it though. It's anger and that's all. No, none of the others in between, even too much joy or happiness. And people, you know, will say gay or feminine because you have happy emotions, which can also arrest cognitive growth. Loneliness, when you can't be vulnerable and mutual risk taking is big in connection. So if I am not able to connect to people vulnerably, then I live a life of loneliness, and which is, you know, detachment or separation from folks. People like avoid vulnerability at all costs because tears and none of that can, you know, you can't do that. So, and not even tears, even to share expressions of love, expressions of desire. Those are really hard. And if you don't have any of that, then what's your connection point? Sexuality, maybe? And so that becomes like the preeminence. And so now we have power and control leading to sexual violence. A lack of empathy. If I can't feel my own shoes, there's no way I'm going to step into your shoes. There's no way I'm going to step in the shoes of folks who are even more marginalized than I am, or into the lives of people in my family. And I will try to fix it because I'm going back to that rigid role piece. So you tell me something, I'm like, let me fix it. No, just a little empathy would be all right. Just validate and empathize. That's all I need. But if I don't know how to do that, then learn because of my arrested emotional and cognitive development, then there's going to be problems. And then mental and physical illness. Like I said, shallow breathing, the stress hormone in your life for, you know, years and years and years and years and years has a physical impact. It just does, because our bodies don't exist in the vacuum, and words land, and emotions and experiences and meanings. And so making sense of our lives, you know, can help with mental and physical illness. Of course, not all mental and physical illness, but it can have an impact.
Thank you, Davlin, for sharing that. Yes. In addition to impacting Black men, it also impacts their partners. We see issues, patriarchy and toxic masculinity leads to issues of power and control within the relationship, and often leads to adversarial relationship between partners. And so oftentimes, because there's a lack of empathy, I can't understand how you're feeling, you should just do. Right? When we avoid vulnerability, vulnerability is essential in order for us to experience connection, which leads to intimacy. So if I can't feel what you're feeling, if I can allow myself to be vulnerable to my partner, then I'm less likely to have that connection that's needed for us to be able to have that intimacy. In addition, living in a society where racism, you know, anti-Blackness is real. So what ends up happening with partners as well is my pain, if it's not acknowledged, so then my pain may be seen as more painful than your pain. So then we're doing the oppression Olympics within the context of the relationship, as opposed to being a united front to be able to deal with the anti-Blackness that's happening in our society, as well as the patriarchal and toxic masculinity systems that we're having to operate in. Another impact on the partner, often women, is bearing the emotional labor in the family. And if these women happen to be Black women as a partner, then you have it compounded by the trope of the strong Black woman. So the strong Black woman now has to endure, right? Has to endure all of it. And when that happens, oftentimes, because there's that stigmatization of getting mental health, because if you get mental health help, what happens is, are you crazy? Because only crazy people need to get mental health services. So we're not going to go there, right? So we're going to have to deal with the depression on our own and not even acknowledge it. So then when that's not happening, how is this working in the relationship? So you have, in addition to all the outside stressors, now each individual is dealing with their own internal stressors as well, and potential mental health issues too.
I think we talked about this before, but that in many ways, Black families, I can only speak for the Southern Black families that I know, look very matriarchal. My grandmother was always the one, she would get everybody together. People were always trying to, do what she said, because she would, put smack down, get everybody together and be like, y'all acted. I mean, she just held it all together, right? Like, so my grandfather did work and provide funds, but she was the center of the relationship. I'm the center of the family. And many families, Southern families I know, that are arranged in that way, that it's actually matriarchal. So I wonder if sometimes that is if that's the adversarial role that happens, because you have men trying to live out patriarchy, because racism, white body supremacy says that men are supposed to do this, but that is not the role typically for our collectivism. And of course, this isn't all Black folks, because we're not a monolith. But just to see that, okay, if that's how that works, then why not let that be? We can find a new way of relating.
Davlin, you bring a very good point. And I appreciate you constantly reminding us that we're not all a monolith, right? The other thing that I think about that I've seen by Dr. Nancy Boyd Franklin in her work on therapy with Black families, she talks about some of the issues around the gendered roles expectations between Black men and Black women, and how Black women are taught that you have to, depend on yourself, you have to be independent, you have to do all this on your own. And so you can't expect that, your partner is going to be there for you. So if this is what some people are being taught, and once again, we're not all monoliths, or not all Black people are being taught this, not all Black women are being taught this, but if there's some of that remnants there, right? And then some Black men are being taught that, Black women, we have the sapphire, the angry Black woman trope. If that's what they're being introduced to in some ways, that she's going to try to emasculate you. If these are some of the stereotypes that are being taught or learn from the environment that they're in. Sometimes it's not even something that their families is necessarily teaching the young Black male or the young Black female, it's society, right? If this is what I'm conditioned to believe about a Black male, that can also, I believe, lead to adversarial relationship dynamics occurring. So thank you for highlighting that as well.
You're welcome. It's there's so many layers, right? Decontextualized, Black women feeling independent goes back, enslavement, Jim Crow, searching for Black men, them not being able to stay home because of, people, searching to try to bring them back, especially as land tenants, where you going? And so there was the Black woman was the home. And that decontextualized means you can't depend on nobody. But that's not really that's not how it started. So yeah, Dr. Joy DeGruy, post-traumatic slave syndrome, talks a little bit about that. And it's like, oh yeah, so many things have been decontextualized. So now it's like, doesn't make sense, or it's not a way to work, but it made sense at the time. Just like carrying forth the story, oral tradition gets left behind for the written word. When it's like, no, let's bring on back the oral tradition as well. We can use both to know what's going on in our families. Oh, and what about the children? So the generational learning of power and control, or the adversarial relationship of power and control. Who's going to have the power in the relationship? Or as Dr. Verdreen was talking about, the oppression Olympics, who Black men have it worse. No, Black women have it worse. It's like, well, actually, we both have it pretty bad. So let's just connect and move forward. Inability to trust. So I'm trusting, are you going to be here, or are you going to choose something else? Because is work the thing that's going to keep you from the family, or are you going to be a part of the family? Lack of safety produces attachment issues in children. If I don't know if my father spends time incarcerated or my mother spends time incarcerated, I don't know if they're going to be there all the time. And so I have attachment issues, and which leads to boundary issues, that I'm either too close to people or too far away. Then oppositional disorders arise, where you have some conduct and, explosive anger, inability to form connections, manipulation, abusive parents, or guardians, anxiety there again, leading to disruptions with food, excuse me, and any kind of hypervigilance, always wondering when the shoe's going to drop, what's going to happen next, a lack of body autonomy. And this is, if people feel like their, parent or their guardian has control over their body, what they wear, where they go. It's like, I am not in control of my body, which is interesting that this is a side note that Resma Menakem, my grandmother's hands, talks about body autonomy, and that rest is one of the ways you fight back against all of this, because it's like the first time in, the last 100 years where people began to start being like, oh, I have control over my body. I could actually nap if I want to. What? I don't have to be a producing machine all the time. And so, because that producing machine gets to the children as well. What y'all doing this Saturday? Why are you in the bed? Get up. What? They just had a week at school. They can't rest, Or no, we got to be productive. So let's keep moving on this Saturday and this Sunday. You can rest after you, do your homework or do your chores or whatever. And then there's no time to rest to play. You can't play because playing is worthless. Why are you playing? You don't need to play. You need to get them books, hit them books, right? It's like, maybe we can have a more expansive view of what childhood is, and to let folks experience and experience what it means to be safe. Because I think that our immune systems, our body systems don't know what that's like as a people in general. And so for children to have that space to rest and grow and laugh and breathe is counter to our society, our culture. And when I say that, I mean the state of the United States.
Yes, Davlin, thank you for sharing that, because while we need that for the children, I think it starts with us as adults really being intentional about normalizing relaxation as productivity. White supremacy, capitalistic society that we live in will tell us otherwise, right? This is where we hear about the hustle and grind culture. Millionaires aren't sleeping while you're sleeping, they're working. That's not true. They pay people to stay up. They don't stay up, right? So we got to be very careful and very intentional about really helping future generations by showing them, by modeling that we are intentional about taking rest, about taking vacations, about attending to self, right?
Yeah, even in the small ways,
Yes.
Taking an hour on a Saturday to just be like, no, we don't have anything planned right now. We just can, chill, sit down, play. You want to play a game or not? Like, what do you want to do with this time? To give them some body autonomy and time autonomy. Within these constraints, you can do whatever you want. Like that's instilling rest and relaxation as well. That, those kind of things that you can put into your day or into your week to give opportunities for body autonomy and for learning that I have power and control over my own life, and for safety. Oh, look, my family has provided an opportunity for me to be safe in this time to do these activities. Okay, this world isn't as unsafe as I thought. There are unsafe times, but I can be safe. I think that's important for children.
Yes, and for them to have choices.
Yeah.
I can do this now, or I can do this later. Mm-hmm. Allowing them to have choice is very important as well. So as we mentioned earlier about the Black emotional BEAM organization, Black Emotional and Mental Health Collaborative, there's a video that we'd like to share with you about what they do, specifically as it pertains to masculinity.
At BEAM, we say, we heal in community. It really is liberating. My name is Leroy Mitchell, and my position with BEAM is the Masculinity and Mental Health Training Manager. BEAM is Black Emotional and Mental Health. We are a national training, movement building, and grant-making institution dedicated to the healing, wellness, and liberation of all Black and marginalized folks. And part of that is a Black Masculinity Reimagined initiative in which I lead. We really seek to build community to explore what masculinity means in our Black communities so that we can center our mental health and decrease intimate partner violence. So I got started with BEAM doing my own work. I actually attended a Black Masculinity Reimagined event. I was just amazed at the vulnerability. I felt a sense of liberation that I had never before experienced being connected with Black masculine folks. And so it was at that moment that I knew, I don't know how, but I want to be involved in this organization and be part of this community.
Without BEAM, I would be more stressed. I would be a more stressed individual. Feelings are expansive. Feelings are important. Feelings can be painful. And feelings are, I think, what it means to be fully human. It's okay to feel everything, but I think BEAM has given me the framework to take responsibility to make sure I'm not hurting anyone and getting the healing that I need with my feelings.
If someone wants to learn more about our organization, you can visit our website, beam.community, or you can follow our Instagram at _beamorg. The ways in which we approach the work continually helps me in my own healing journey and helps me connect with myself, recognize my wholeness, and recognize the expansiveness of who I am. That right there is liberation for me, and that is why I continue to work with BEAM, and I'm so rooted in this organization and the work that we do. At BEAM, we say,
So this is also from BEAM about centering mental health for masculine centered folks. And I love that they say the centering of masculine folks, because this is not just about men, right? It's about toxic masculinity, which affects all of us. In some one way or another, when folks are acting out of patriarchy and racism and toxic masculinity. And so this centering masculine folks can be centering if you are walking in a lot of masculine energy, but maybe you in the world you present as femme. That can be for you as well. So catching myself when I start putting myself down in my head, who can't use that as a as a reminder? Embracing having more emotionally real conversation with my masculine friends, but bros, right? Have emotionally real conversation. That's risk. So the I'm taking some risk with folks. In naming, I can't control other people's actions and focusing on mine instead. This is a direct push against patriarchy, because patriarchy says I can control you and tell you what to do and brutalize. And this says, no, I can't do that. I can only control myself, my own actions. Taking time to express my feelings instead of detaching, distracting, or avoiding. Ooh, they hit all of them. Take the time, express what you feel. I'm sad, I'm angry, using that feelings wheel, because it's got all kinds of options. You use so many feeling words. And instead of being like, nah, I don't want to feel nothing, so I'm just gonna go and be alone, or I'm gonna watch some porn or watch some TV, or I'm going to watch some a show and watch 18,000 episodes in order to distract myself, or I'm going to avoid them and push them down or numb them with some food or some drugs or alcohol. I mean, they hit it all. So the other option is also take time, express those feels. Easing the grind by asking for help from others. Woo, asking for help is super vulnerable. And yeah, it's hard. It's hard because how do you trust that somebody's going to be there? And then remembering that I am enough. I don't have to prove my masculinity, manhood, or worth by overworking, being tough, or being strong. I mean, this is the exact opposite of that quote or the definition we read earlier with toughness and anti-femininity. It's like, no, actually, I don't have to prove to you or prove to anybody anything. I am enough. And you know, there's only a few basic kind of lies that people believe and act out of and spend life trying to, you know, correct. And one of those is I'm not enough. You know, I'm not enough, I don't matter. And this is saying, no, you do matter and you are enough. And remembering that constantly instead of putting ourselves down.
Thank you, Davlin. We'd like to also share some quotes that we found to be very important with regards to fighting toxic masculinity. And these are believed from Frederick Slayer, who wrote an essay regarding this matter. So, men must first admit patriarchy exists and then understand how patriarchy works. We must understand the combination of daily sexual harassment, such as, hey, ma, can I holla? Or damn, you got a fat ass, with the constant threat of being sexually assaulted, creates a way of knowing the world that is fundamentally different from that of men. Men must acknowledge, empathize with, and learn from the experiences of women. So that right there definitely is fighting patriarchy, what patriarchy says, and what toxic masculinity says as well, is that self-awareness, right? So that we can have the ability to empathize.
Self-awareness is the key to so many things. I feel like taking time weekly to just be self-aware. What happened this week? What did I do? What did I feel? How did I grow? What's happening inside? What's happening in my relationships? A weekly like check-in. You can see these things, you know, and you can see when it's reversed, because there are times when this is happening to men as well, you know, but they're like, oh, it doesn't matter, because to say something about it would be, oh, that's too feminine. You know, women, Black women, any kind of woman, somebody with boundary issues can press up on your boundaries and violate them. And being willing to say that out loud makes all of us better. We can also grow through vulnerability. This is Frederick Slayer's Essays 444, sends an important message about masculinity. Often, when Black men dare to express their innermost feelings, they are forced to confront the dangerous paradigm of hypermasculinity. For them, being perceived as soft or feminine is a gamble. Although the wager may yield tremendous personal growth, Black men navigate internal conflict in attempts to preserve social expectations, outward perception, and personal safety. So it takes a lot of risk, basically, but we grow through vulnerability. Sharing our feelings with other people, taking the risk, and you know, rooting our safety in something other than roles and carrying out a certain role.
And we also grow through connection. Like toxic masculinity, hypermasculinity demands men prove their manhood by disassociating from their inner emotional lives and vulnerability. Right. So this is why it's so key when we talk about connection and vulnerability. That's going to help build intimacy with other individuals. So it's important for us not to support isolation and disassociating from our emotional lives. And one way in which we can do that is by not doing being self-aware of what's going on with us. So this is why self-awareness is so important, because it lends itself well to being able to connect and grow through connections with others.
Also grow through reimagining Black masculinity. So what does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be a Black man? What does it mean to be a masculine presenting person? What is my role as that? Can I be flexible or fluid in my role instead of rigid? Can it keep expanding? Those are like questions to consider for Black masculine presenting folks or Black men, Black males. It's important to think about. Am I going to let patriarchy and racism and toxic masculinity define who I need to be in the world? And how do I really, really get into that and think through it and parse through, okay, these are the ways I'm going to show up in the world. I want to be known as someone who is, kind and loving and also strong and powerful. And how do I do that? What does that mean in my interactions? And can I interrogate my personality? Are there 3 or 4 people I would trust to say, how do you see me? What are the character traits that I hold as a Black man? And, that's scary. What are they going to say? It's like, well, you got to ask them. But it's like reimagining, the folks in Beam are doing, which I really love, their resources and work through reimagining Black masculinity. We're going to have some question and answer time. These are some of our resources. Really great resources. And then Vadreen's Healing Services. The Dr. Vadreen.
Yes, we're open for questions. I don't know, Dr. Reader, if you wanted to moderate those.
While I was back here taking notes, I'm like, yes, this is really good. And I was so excited to hear about the Beam organization. I've never heard of them. And so thank you for sharing that resource. And I'm sure those of you who are watching probably were, glad to hear that the organization exists as well. But also thank you to a very thought-provoking presentation. Really caused you to think about some terms that we hear but may not fully understand, but also some of our own learned messaging through the culture we live in and how we're perpetuating such behaviors and standards and all of things of that nature within our families. And so thank you for that eye-opening presentation, and also offering some reasons to think about how to remedy some of that through self-awareness. And I think that applies not just for men, but also for women, to do a lot of self-reflection to grow forward. So thank you for that. All right. So those of you who are still watching, we would love to hear from you. Please ask your questions that you may have or reflections or comments you may have regarding today's presentation. I know there was a lot to chew on and things to process, but please share with us your thoughts. We want to hear from you. And I also enjoyed the video, the poem read by Max. That was a great poem as well. So thank you for sharing that with us all as well. Any thoughts or questions or even reflections? So we have one in the chat. Someone says, thank you for a fabulous presentation. I love the Beam resource. Thank you. Someone posed a question. Will this webinar recording the PowerPoint be available for us? It was a great presentation. Now the video will be made available probably within the first week of March. So the plan is to have all 3 webinars we did this for this series all put out together at the same time. So what I'll do is I'll give myself a note to send you guys an email to notify you of when these recordings will be made available. As for the PowerPoint presentation, those slides are the property of Vadreen Healing Services. And so if Dr. Vadreen has a modified version of or some resources she can provide me with to provide to you, that would be great if that could be made available. But if not, just stay tuned for the replay of this presentation. So will this This was fabulous. Helped me feel more. You know what, guys? Let me be transparent here. Put my glasses on instead of acting like I can't see. This was fabulous. Helped me feel more secure with myself and self-reflection, and help show more of myself, my son see the man I am. Thank you, William. Someone else said, thank you. Thanks for the interview with Bell Hooks. For recitation was touching, ladies. Did I pronounce it? I think I mispronounced that.
Yes, that's it. You got it.
Okay. You know, sometimes I'm like,
Yeah, no, I check in sometimes. I hear you.
And I think that was all of the comments in the chat box that I can see. Let's see, maybe scroll up to be sure I captured everyone's response. Thank you for your, okay, that was Dr. Vadrine. There were no other questions in the Q&A box. Okay. So Dr. Vadrine and Davlin, do you have any last words for the audience before we end today's presentation?
I do. I just want to say thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I really appreciate Philadelphia Fight putting this on and making this available. I do believe it's really important for us to recognize that masculinity becomes very fragile when it's rigid, right? Through its rigidity. When we can't afford the ability to, hold the panoply of gender expressions, sexual cultural orientations, in the society that we live, then this is when we run the risk of lashing out, right? Because we're supposed to hold on to these, culturally constituted expectations about what masculinity is. And so that leads to, physical dominance, aggression, and sometimes inwardly expressed experiences of depression, addiction, and even suicidality. And so it's so important. So this is why I'm so thankful to Philadelphia Fight for giving us this opportunity to present this webinar. So thank you everyone for coming. Really appreciate it.
Let me lend my thanks as well to Philadelphia Fight and also to Vadrine Healing Services. In addition, I just think we talk often about culture evolving. And so gender is evolving alongside culture with various ways of folks identifying on the masculine spectrum. And so I think folks thinking that toxic masculinity doesn't happen because I identify as, it can still happen. Toxic masculinity and patriarchy is like water that we're drinking. And so we're trying to be like, oh, I don't want to drink that water, but you can't help it because you're already swimming in it. And so I think to interrogate, all of us like to interrogate, how is patriarchy at work in my life? How is toxic masculinity work in my life? Even if I am a feminine, I work out of my feminine energy, or I identify as a Black woman. Well, but what things am I believing? Oh, he need to go, I can already do it because I've learned over the years, oh, he needs to get a job, or, oh, does he make more than you? Oh, what does he do? Oh, all the questions that we ask about performing, it's like all about performing this, whatever those roles are. It's not like, well, like Bell Hooks was saying, who is he or who am I? And how do I show up in the world in some of those roles and outside of them?
And is it, as a woman, do I allow my male partner to, be vulnerable? Like if he starts to cry, I'm gonna be like, what the heck is wrong with him? Like, what is going on? Like this ain't, like, I have to question that because these are ways in which I've internalized toxic masculinity, and then can also perpetuate it in my own relationship by having these expectations about the Black man that I'm in love with or what have you. So I really appreciate you calling us to task, Davlin, that we have to question and do the, self-reflection and self-assessment about how we hold on to these patriarchal systems, or how we hold on to toxic masculinity and racism, and how, we manifest it in what we do in our relationships with Black men.
I really do think we need to look at the matriarchal side, because I think about most people, when people are thanking folks, they're like, I want to thank my mama, and you're like, oh, was your dad not around? No, he was there. It's like, oh, okay. Okay, cool. Say more. And so it's like we are operating, because in general, Black folks operate, at least Southern people that I'm familiar with, is collective. more of a collective society, but we're operating collectively within an individualistic nation. And so there's this constant like struggle against, boundaries. What does boundary look like if you're in a collective society? It's different than when you're individualistic. So, and then you move out to, okay, well, if I'm trying to live this patriarchal stuff where like, I gotta be but that's not who I am. I really lean to the nurture and the love of like Black women to lead.
Yes. And the other part of that too that I appreciate you saying is, like in society, we're taught that, Black men are as involved with their children. And in actuality, research shows that Black men are one of the most involved fathers for their children in this nation. But we don't hear that. That's not what's shown on TV. So we have to be mindful of what is it that we're taking in, right? And where's this information coming from? And who's the one providing us with this information, right? Mm-hmm. So that's the other piece of this that we don't take into consideration. And we hear statements like, I'm your mama and your daddy. What does that do? If I'm telling my child that I'm your mama and your daddy, no, ma'am, I'm not, right? Mm-hmm. So these are all the things, these are all the ways that we don't even think about, insidious ways in which we can support toxic masculinity in our families, and in our relationships. And so we really have to call ourselves to task.
Yeah, the same gender
Black masculinity.
Yeah, and same gender, relationships as well. It's like just because I'm in a relationship with a loving Black woman doesn't mean that toxic masculinity and patriarchy isn't in that relationship too. Or two masculine presenting folks together. It's like, how is it at work there? Is someone taking on the role of, toxic masculinity and patriarchy? What's happening with power and control? And so I think we gotta, everybody needs to be interrogating how it's at work in us.
Yes, so important.
So you definitely had a reaction in the audience regarding your comment about, women saying, I'm your mom and your dad. And I think, you hear a lot of that, especially around the holidays like the Father's Day or Mother's Day. And oftentimes Mother's Day is a big deal around Mother's Day, and Father's Day get a little bit of airtime and celebration. And you're right. Black men are active in the lives of their children. So I'm glad that you acknowledge that, because we don't see it or hear it often.
And that's intentional. We have to ask, who does this benefit when we don't acknowledge that? Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. What systems? You got patriarchal system, you got racism out here, you got toxic masculinity.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. So someone in the audience said, yes, talk about that one, parent being mom and dad. And so it sounds like people in the audience can relate and appreciate your sharing that perspective of that, experience of how things are presented about our Black men, and things of how we as women may perpetuate the whole toxic masculinity behaviors. So thank you for that. Any other questions or reflections? I enjoy the free flow of this organic conversation we're having about this topic. I think a lot of gems are offered just in the organic way that we're talking. And so if someone has a question or a thought, feel free to put it in the chat. I'll give you a couple of minutes. If not, then we'll end. So I'll give you a couple of minutes to ask a question or pose a thought.
I also think Christianity, evangelical, has done something to affect this patriarchal view. I know it's kind of touchy because faith gets people riled up, but when you divorce the scripture from its context, you also get problems with patriarchy. It's like people don't take the cultural consideration and then what that meant for them at that time, and then what that could possibly mean now, but we don't know exactly because grammar changes and all of that. So when people are like, oh, well, you shouldn't teach a man, it's like, okay, so now I can't share knowledge with my man in teaching. And is it just spiritual teaching, or is it like math too? Like, where's the line? And so you get all this stuff going on. And so in your churches, people are like, where's the men leadership? It's like, well, you got all these women here, so can women do some of the leading in that way, and then allow men to lead in the ways that they want to lead? It's just like there's only one way to be. you know?
Yeah, and that, I think that's the problem, Davlin, right? It's either this or that. This is how we operate in binaries. And when we do that, this is the conflict that arises at times, right? And I think sometimes we like to have that ability to just categorize and know what to predict, and I don't need to figure out anything else. But that also can arrest our development too, right? But I wouldn't mind if you would share, Davlin, a little bit about your history when you're talking about religion, because I think that would be important if you wouldn't mind sharing.
No, we're not. Oh, I guess I didn't introduce myself either, did I? Hi, I'm Davelin, and let's see, I went to a country overseas to be a missionary for almost 4 years, and where I taught English and did some church planning. Then moved back to the States and went to school to get my degree in spiritual direction. And then moved on back to South Carolina to get my master's in marriage and family therapy. So I have some, I guess, training around biblical hermeneutics, and so that's where that comes from. It's the interrogating of where things come from. It's the curiosity. When you open up a Bible or a book of any kind, you think about, who's the author? What are they trying to say? And all of a sudden, when you get to some sacred text, people don't ask those questions anymore. And so I wonder what it would be like if we all got really curious, like, where did this come from? What is it saying? Who benefits from what this is saying? Is it really love? Because some of these things don't look like love. But I think the sacred text can handle it.
Well, thank you so much, Davlin. You just used a word I never heard of before. What is it? Hermeneutics? Like, look at that. Just love Black people. Our Black people is shining, loving the melanin. I do appreciate that, you sharing that, because it's true. I think that happens a great deal. When we start asking questions, is it not okay to ask questions within, the scriptural realm? So thank you for sharing your background. I think that's really important.
So you have several questions that just emerged. So one question is, how do you both feel about generational wealth, legacy, and the statement Ira, am I pronouncing the name correctly? Baker made? I guess the quote you made early on in the presentation, there must have been a comment about generational wealth and legacy in that statement. So the question is, how do you both feel about that statement?
I believe it's true. So the generational wealth of white people is because of the exploitation of labor, whether you're in the North or South, right? South was doing the stuff and the North was going, oh, no, but then taking the money and building things from it. So you got exploitation everywhere. And so that causes generational wealth for them. And then when it was time to get the 40 acres and the mule, a few people got it, but not all of us. And so you start at a place where you're already behind because of education and learning that wasn't offered, that was forbidden. And so you start with this ginormous gap. And then there's no apology and no grounding in, oh, you're not animals. No, there was none of that was said. You are not animals. You are people, and there's an equalness because of humanity. And then you're like, oh, you're just not doing anything because you're not working hard. But all of the systems are built against you and for the benefit of the white middle class. Once the white middle class is formed, then it's like, oh, we don't need these systems anymore because we got what we need. But what about these people over here? Oh, they'll be fine. So now we're like, okay, well, what we need to do is get land, right? Black people buy land because land is the key to generational wealth. It is not. 2 to 3 generations later, it's gone. So something has to happen with the systems and the way we live in capitalism in order for generational wealth to actually be a real thing. Because right now it's fake, that it ends up leaving by various things, people still not knowing how to manage wealth, or government taking wealth. Somebody decides they want your land, the eminent domain is gone. So people like to pretend like land ownership. We never really own land. It's never really yours. You might get it for a couple of years, but then who's it going to? your children or sometimes the government again, because if you owe some money. So it's like the system is rigged against all of us. So I wonder if our generational wealth could be focused on healing. If I pass down healing to my family, if I pass down loving people to my family, so then the wealth looks a bit bigger. Now, do I think we should be compensated for our work? Yes. Do I think there's abundance? Yes. I think scarcity is a myth.
So thank you, Davlin. That's part of what I was going to say is we have to expand our understanding of what generational wealth is. Okay, so yes, I definitely think healing, but I think your wealth is your health. So that's where healing comes in, not just physically, but emotionally healing, mentally healing, and then also thinking about social capital. Like we don't think about the loving relationships that we need to have with regards to our partners and our children and what we leave in our children, I think is really important, more so than what you give to them. Because as you stated, Davlin, land, yes, you can leave it, but someone can come over, as we've seen several times, and steal that land that really doesn't belong to anyone, right? And then we need to think about abundance outside of just money. Because as Davlin used to say, before it was the dollars, it was a cowrie shell. So that's symbolic, right? There's different ways in which, that's going to evolve. However, that human connection is vital. And we know throughout time that has been essential. Human connection, social capital is essential to us being able to live healthy and wealthy lives. So we have to expand what our understanding of generational wealth is, right? Because we know it's not just getting your degrees. Because these degrees, we see that's not changing the generational gap at all, a significant portion, right? So that's not what it is. So we have to expand the way in which we think about generational wealth. Those are my thoughts.
Someone said, oh, hello. I'm sorry. Yes, thank you so much for answering my question. Someone said, you better preach, Davlin, generational healing. Another comment was, the scriptures written by women is in the lost book of the Bible. I found the book of Mary liberating. And so, yeah, thank you all for adding your comments. I believe Sister Barbara Muhammad, you have your hand raised. If you can, please express your question either in the chat box or in the Q&A box. I know we have a few minutes left and we'd love to hear from you if you have a question. Thank you again, Dr. Vadrine and Davlin for I'm trying to lower the hand. Okay. For your sharing on this topic and just the organic conversations we're having that has kind of birthed out of this topic. So thank you. And thank you to the audience of those of you who are still listening and sharing in the chat box. So if there isn't anything else to be shared by the audience or any questions, we are going to end today's presentation. I think that's it. I think that's it. There's nothing else in the chat box. Okay. In the Q&A, we answered that question. Okay. So I think we covered everyone. Thank you all for participating. Dr. Vadrine, Davlin, have an amazing rest of your day. Thank you all for attending our Black History webinar series and homage to Bell Hooks. Thank you again. The recordings will be available the first week of March, so stay tuned for that. It will be housed on our YouTube page, which you can find it at Cheetah at Philadelphia Fight on YouTube. Again, thank you all. Have a great day. Take care. Bye.